Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. Fired up about the podcast we have coming your way today. We are joined by Adam Munsterteiger of BuffStampede.com, covering everything Colorado. We're going to take a deep dive into Kansas versus Colorado coming up this weekend. It's a big game. Colorado's looking to keep their Big 12 title hopes alive and continue what's been a really impressive year two under Deion Sanders. KU obviously still trying to keep its bowl hopes alive. There really is a lot at stake on Saturday, and I think it's going to be a really fascinating game, probably one that's going to be super exciting for the neutral, if I had to guess. But Adam, I do want to take a step back here and go back to the beginning because I've really enjoyed watching Colorado. I'm all for coaches that show personality. I think I've talked about this on the podcast in years past. Like, I love it. Like coach talk is boring. Like, tell us what you feel. And I think Deion Sanders has really brought that. And that's something Lance Leipold talked about this week, is the fact that, Deion has shouldered some of that scrutiny, maybe talking about the portal and the way things are in college athletics now. And he's obviously been a different character in the coaching world. So for you, like in your perspective, what has it been like going from, in years past, where I think about Mel Tucker, and then, you get to the point now where it's Deion Sanders. Just what's it been like now coaching or covering a coach like this in a program now that has a lot of eyeballs on it every single week?
Well, it's fun, Michael. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I don't know how many Kansas fans tuned in to Colorado football games in 2022. If you did, I feel bad for you because I had to be there and cover that firsthand. Carl Jarrell's third season, his last season, and he was fired 5 games into that season. It was brutal. They ranked dead last out of, I think it was at that time 123 FBS programs in scoring margin. So it was one of those seasons where at times opposing teams could kind of name their score against Colorado. And much of that season, Michael, we're covering a coaching search. That's where we were at in this program. And I remember it being early November in 2022, and I started to kind of hear the Deion Sanders to Colorado rumors when he was at Jackson State. And at first I didn't believe it. And then I had more and more sources talk to me and say, no, like this is a legit thing. And it was about 2 years ago now that I started reporting pretty heavily in terms of this was going to happen. And it needed to play out there at Jackson State. Deion Sanders took their program to the Celebration Bowl that season. And so he wanted to kind of finish the job he had done there. But when he finally landed in Boulder, it was this breath of fresh air because this was somebody that was going to be able to attract talent to a program that does not have talent in its backyard. Colorado has maybe 2-3 guys, if Colorado is competing for college football playoffs, that you'd want every year. So you've got to reach out and you've got to go to Southern California, you got to go to Texas. And with Coach Prime coming in, then you unlocked Florida. You unlocked kind of the southern region. Georgia has been pretty big for the Buffs with their recruiting efforts. They've been able to national recruit under him. And so it was exactly what this program needed. And Coach Prime has said many times, I'm a need to be needed person. So in that sense, this was a perfect fit. Now, they allowed him to run the program the way he needed it to. He saw that this was a program that needed to be kind of gutted, really. And that's why his initial press conference, he goes in the meeting room with the players and says, we're going to bring our Louis in. And that was kind of just a message of like, can you step up? And there have been a handful of guys that were in that room that day that have stepped up, but we've really had to see a roster rebuild in Colorado. The first offseason was pretty short. Again, he was coaching in the Celebration Bowl, so they didn't quite have that full 2 transfer windows that you need to really rebuild a roster. But they did a good job in that short period of time, and certainly Coach Prime's cachet and his fame helped with that. And then you saw them really go into this past offseason knowing what the issues were and fixing it. And it's not 100%, but it's in the 90 percentile in terms of what they did to correct those issues. And we've seen the offensive line get better. We've seen the defensive line go from bottom half of the Pac-12 to top half of the Big 12 this year. So it's been great for Colorado fans that have been starved. 2016 was a great season. Buffaloes won the Pac-12 South that year, won 10 games. But outside of that, it's been a rough road for the Buffaloes football fans. And so everybody's kind of just enjoying this right now. And there's a lot in front of the Buffaloes this season now. Obviously,
Yeah.
If they win the next two games in the Big 12 championship game, and then who knows? But so it's been a fun road. It's been a tough road prior to Coach Prime coming to Boulder.
I think that's something that I think longtime KU fans and Colorado fans who have been longtime followers of the program can probably agree on is tough times, in kind of the late 20 teens and what it can be like. And it is interesting too, that you look at two head coaches. I know Lance Leipold said there's stuff in common between him and Deion Sanders, and broadly, yeah, right. Deion worked his way up from being a high school coach, Jackson State, Colorado. Lance went from being D3 to Buffalo to Kansas, right? There's some commonality there, but I think the way they've gone about building the program is different. For Leipold, it's been a lot about, all right, there were a lot of young players in the program, develop those guys over time, add transfers in to plug holes. Like you mentioned, it's almost maybe the inverse of Colorado, where it's bring transfers in to kind of fill out some big time spots on the roster, but there's still guys that have developed over the course of time at Colorado and are contributing this year. I do find it interesting that, that's what it is, college football these days. There are different ways to build a program, and obviously KU's not had the season, that I think a lot of people would have thought, but Colorado has turned things around. Is there an element of this season that surprised you maybe? Like, what were you expecting going into the year, and how has this season surpassed your expectations? Because you can look in the preseason, and obviously preseason rankings mean nothing, as we see in the Big 12 every year, with teams picked to finish at the bottom, finishing kind of near the top. That happens pretty frequently. But what were your expectations going into the year, and how have those kind of lined up with what you've seen on the field?
Yeah, I'll definitely dive into that. Be happy to. I want to go back to your point about kind of how Deion Sanders built this program. Well, he came to Boulder with Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter having limited amount of eligibility, right? And so Shedeur Sanders 2 years, Travis Hunter 3, but he was going to go pro after his junior year, which on a Zoom call today with some national media members, he confirmed that he's going to the NFL after the season. So you wanted to maximize that window. And you weren't going to do that by recruiting a bunch of high school guys.
True. Yeah.
So that's partly why they did that. Now, you saw today they've got one of the top ranked quarterbacks in the 2025 class, Julian Lewis, committed. And so they are going to be pretty transfer portal heavy, because Coach Prime is not a patient guy to be sitting through another 4-8 season. He doesn't want to experience that again. So, I think Colorado fans applaud that. Like, they want to continue this, even though they know they're going to lose some really talented players off this roster. But you've seen their high school recruiting efforts increase a little bit. And that kind of bucks at the national trend that he's going to go coach the Cowboys or whoever next year. And like, genuinely, he has autonomy to run the program the way he wants. And it's worked out really well in Boulder. So I think I don't know how long he's going to be in Boulder, but I'd be very surprised if he's not the head coach in 2025. In terms of things that have surprised me, the defensive just tribe mentality they've been playing with this year. They're gang tackling. They look so much better defensively than the defense that Charles Kelly fielded last year. They were one of the worst defenses in the country last year. Their heads were swimming, Michael. They had this complex scheme that Charles Kelly came over from Alabama with. When you're at Alabama, you've got a 3 deep that's like blue chip recruits, and you can kind of develop guys a little bit in that sense of here's this complex scheme, you got to learn it. But when you're recruiting through the transfer portal, that just again, if you know football, one piece is confused on a play, that could be a touchdown. And so that was not a good recipe that they had last year. Robert Livingston comes in after 12 years in the Bengals organization in the NFL, did not have defensive coordinating experience before. So a lot of us are looking at his resume and we're seeing some of the things that he's done in the past and going, it looks like he deserves a chance, but until somebody goes out there and calls a defense, that's going to be a question mark. He
Mm.
came in and he's passed this test with flying colors. This defense has given up 12 less points per game than they did a year ago. And they've even been better in the second half of games, which kind of shows the ability of the staff to make adjustments. And that's just honestly something we haven't seen a whole lot in Boulder.
Mm.
So that's been the thing that has surprised me the most.
Yeah, well, and it's so funny you mentioned that because so at the start of the week, I kind of take a minute to look at some of the numbers and stats. And again, we were talking about this before we started recording. The way the TV slots have worked for the Big 12 this year, either you're basically, unless you're on Big Noon, which Colorado was last week, you're either at 2:30 or 6. And which I guess for if you're listening to some Boulder, right, it's different times. But for Central, I've not watched a lot of Colorado. And so I went back this week and watched bits of the UCF game in Texas Tech. And the thing that stood out to me most was the defense. And then you look at some of the numbers, and it's actually the defensive numbers that kind of catch your attention because I was going in thinking, okay, all right, offense, explosive passing attack, right? The run game, hit or miss. The defense, it's decent. But then you look at the numbers and you watch them play and you're like, okay, yeah, this is actually a really, really solid defense. Everyone knows about Travis Hunter, right? And I wrote about that on our website today. Like what he is doing is insane. 80% of snaps on offense, 80% of snaps on defense. He's played 1,100, almost 1,200 snaps this year. Everyone knows about him on defense, right? But who are some of maybe the other guys on defense that have been making a lot of plays, and maybe walk us through how these pieces come together and what Colorado's kind of end goal is as a defensive unit?
Covering games at Folsom Field, where I think media were like 4 rows up from where the stands end. And there's one player, every time he makes a tackle, I hear that tackle. It's linebacker Nakai Hill-Green. He has gone from somebody that wasn't even in the starting lineup when Colorado kicked off this season to now, honestly, I think he's a top 3-4 round pick in the NFL draft this coming April. He has really boosted his stock and become – and I go back to the improvement by that defensive line through the portal is – these linebackers can do their job this year. Last year, it was a mess. In when you're having to take on blockers in that second level, that's where big plays happen, especially in the ground game. And that has not been the case this year. The front has done a good job of letting Nakai Hill-Green and Vontae Bentley, the linebackers, do their thing, and they've been pretty solid. On the back end, Cam Sillman-Craig is somebody that is the heartbeat of this Colorado defense from a leadership, just from an effort standpoint. There are plays that are on the other side of the field, and you just see him hauling his butt 100 miles an hour towards that, and not 100 miles an hour, maybe 20. But he is a guy that kind of sets the tone for this defense, and so he's been a big factor for them as well. Offensively, LeJonte Wester, he is a blur at slot receiver. He returned a punt as well. That he's also in the game in special teams. He had a 76-yard return for a touchdown last week. So those are more some of I wouldn't say under the radar, but lesser known guys as compared to Travis and Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, and those guys get a lot of attention, rightfully so. One more question on the defense. KU's run game has been a strength all season, and they've done a good job of running against everybody. Until BYU last week, they're the first team to hold KU under 150 rushing yards all year. UCF is a team that's run the ball really well consistently. They were decent against Colorado statistically, but how has Colorado done against the run this year, and maybe against some of maybe the teams that have run the ball a little bit more consistently in the Big 12, like K-State, UCF are really the two that come to my mind that feel like they're on the same kind of level as KU in terms of a consistent run game that has been consistent all year.
Yeah, it's been better here in the last month or so. There were some issues with stopping the ground game. DJ Giddens, you mentioned Kansas State, had a pretty big performance against the Buffs, and at times had Colorado's back end kind of on ice skates. And that was one of the games you think back to where a running back this year has really gotten their way against Colorado. And then there have been kind of glimpses here and there where quarterbacks have been able to find some holes to really have big gains in the ground. So that's kind of they've been much better.
Mm.
But if I'm Kansas, I'm looking at the ground game as kind of the area that you want to try to exploit Colorado's defense, even though they've been quite a bit better at that. You look at the secondary. Colorado's got at least 4 future NFL cornerbacks on the roster that they kind of rotate through there, and their safety plays pretty good. So
Mm.
it is on the ground, but again, this defense for Colorado has gotten substantially better.
Something else that's got a lot better is the offensive line for Colorado. That was a huge thing last year. I remember watching a lot. I watched a lot of Colorado last year with how much they're on like Big Noon and some of the bigger games. And that was something that really struck me was just not only just like size wise, but just in terms of physicality, they really, really struggled. And this year it's been different. And, talking to Dean Miller, the KU defensive end this week, he mentioned Jordan Seaton and how from KU's perspective, they don't think he's even a freshman anymore, right? He's a true freshman, blue chip recruit. I mean, you look at the guy playing, he doesn't look like he should be, 17, 18, 19 years old. He looks like he should be in his, 20s. He's a physically imposing guy, but how is this offensive line rebuild progression gone to where now Colorado's run game is improving? Shedeur Sanders isn't being sacked 5, 6, 7, 8 times a game. How is this thing improved, and what has been kind of big contributions to that?
Yeah, the floor was risen substantially for that offensive line going into the season, just based off the talent in that group. Last year, they brought in Sean Lewis as their offensive coordinator, and with him, he brought his offensive line coach from Kent State, Bill O'Boyle. Bill O'Boyle is a really good offensive line coach, but he had spent pretty much his entire coaching career in like the RMAC D2 ranks, and so his idea of what it takes to be an offensive lineman at this level just wasn't what they needed. And so they brought in a bunch of guys from the JUCO ranks. They had some Kent State transfers, some guys from the JUCO. Yeah, it just was not the level of talent that you need to. And so when they ran into issues last year, it got ugly pretty quick. And they didn't really have guys that they could go to in the depth of their offensive line, and so it just got worse and worse. And so they hired Phil Lodeholt, who had an All-American career at Oklahoma, went to coach for the Vikings went to play for the Vikings for a long time, came back to the college ranks, got his feet wet in the coaching industry, and he was not the offensive line coach at Oklahoma when Colorado hired him. But by all accounts, he was the offensive line coach in Oklahoma, if you get what I'm saying. Like, he was the guy that was making a huge impact with that group there. And so that's why Coach Prime really fell in love with him. And he's come in and, I think he's about 6'6". He's still about 300 pounds. And, he is the definition of speak softly and carry a big stick. Like, the guys in that room respect him, but he also knew, coming from Oklahoma, spending that time with the Minnesota Vikings, of what it takes to be successful at this level. And so their recruiting was much better through the portal on the offensive line. And they've actually rotated 7, 8 guys the last few weeks. Last week it was 7. Before that it was 8. And so they like kind of the depth they have there. There were some issues at times early this season. There were some games where that group kind of fell apart, but the mental makeup of that group is so much better than last year. Whereas last year, when the pressure really got heavy on that group, they turtled. This year's group has kind of had the bravado to step up and get better. And Jordan Seaton at left tackle as a true freshman has just been better than you could expect any 19-year-old to be at this point. And he's going to be a first-round pick in a couple of years. And they've had some other guys that have had moments. It hasn't been a perfect group, but, man, it has been so much better than it was a year ago, to your point.
Yeah, and we can hit on some of the skill position guys because, I mean, it's by far the best wide receiver group KU's played. I think best wide receiver group in the Big 12. Kobe Bryant said that. I think nobody would really go against that. I mean, you look at the numbers, it's pretty insane. Like Travis Hunter, like 74 receptions for 900 yards. LaJohntay Wester, 55 for 600. Will Shepard, 40 for 540. Jimmy Horn, 33 for 400. Like, it's just insane production from really talented players. And they're guys that can just make you miss. And for me, thinking about this Kansas secondary that has improved, but has sometimes struggled allowing big plays through the air. That's been something that's been very consistent this year. They've been better down to down consistency wise as the season has gone on, but big plays still get them. How exactly is Colorado trying to attack? Is this we're just throwing it up 35, 40 yards downfield and hoping guys come down with it? Is it underneath stuff that they're trying to get, yards after catch? How exactly is Colorado approaching things with, Shooter Sanders and obviously the really talented wide receiver core?
Yeah, it's more of kind of those extremes. They do have a lot of success in the short game. They run a lot of screens, and they will definitely test the ball downfield. The mid passing game has not been quite as strong as a lot of programs in the country. And then ground game wise, they have had a few glimpses here and there that they're much better running the ball than they were last year, but the bar was set so low. They still, I think, are second to last in the country in rushing yards per game. So it is very much a 10 personnel passing offense. They have worked in a little bit more 11 personnel. They've had success with that at times. There is this feeling among Colorado fans, they wish they could see Isaiah Augustus, who has had a pretty good yards per carry average this season, just to see what it would look like if he consistently gets that 20 carry a game per opportunity. Yeah. He hasn't quite gotten that outside of one game this year. So that part of it, it's been a little bit more one-dimensional still, but it's becoming a little bit more multi-dimensional, just not quite to the extreme a lot of Colorado fans want. But yeah, those receivers are pretty good at making the first guy miss. Yeah. And they have taken on kind of a team goal mentality where you see receivers doing a good job blocking for the most part. So, it's been an offense that leads the Big 12 in scoring if you just look at conference games.
Yep.
But yet there's this feeling, if you've watched Colorado this year, especially with some of the slow starts they've had, that this could be a Colorado offense that's much better than it has been when you just look at the overall talent.
Definitely. And real quick, Jimmy Horn, I listened to Dion talk earlier this week. Injury going on. Do you think he'll play this weekend?
He got banged up 2 weeks ago down at Texas Tech. It's funny because tortillas were flying like crazy down there. And it had been a long time since Texas Tech games in Lubbock had been on my radar. Obviously, Colorado was in the Pac-12 for 13 years. And so go down there, and the folks in the Texas Tech press conference were saying that they had never seen that many tortillas thrown in one game before. So it was pretty wild. And there was this rumor that Jimmy Horn slipped on a tortilla, and that's how he got hurt. Have come to find out that, no, he did hurt his ankle on a kickoff return, but it was not on a tortilla. And he is day-to-day right now. They're hoping to get him back in the mix. I would say chances are better than not that he will play against Kansas, but we haven't got definitive word. We will probably have to wait till pregame on Saturday to know for sure.
Yeah, well, we're probably a year or two away from getting those injury reports. I feel like those are coming. Those are going to come at some point, but hopefully sooner rather than later. One final question then. What area of this game from a Colorado perspective worries you most? Like, what about Kansas, or what about Colorado? Like, what worries you about Colorado's ability to win the game?
There are problems with slow starts this year. Anytime you go on the road, that can obviously be a recipe for disaster. And there's no thought that Colorado is overlooking Kansas. I've covered now, I think, 22 Colorado football teams, and there's a locked-in just demeanor with this team that you sense. And so I don't see this as like, oh, we're overlooking Kansas. Like, and partly from that sense, maybe it helps that Kansas has played the role of spoiler already here in recent weeks. So there should be no reason to overlook them. And I think the concern is just Kansas is playing really good football. You're going on the road. Colorado has played well on the road this year. And Kansas obviously has a dual threat quarterback, a running back that can make a lot of plays. And so the run defense would be number one. Kind of Colorado's history of slow starts would be number two. But those would be kind of the main things I would look
Mm.
at.
Love it. Awesome. Well, great stuff, Adam. For folks that are watching this from a Kansas perspective, where can they find the rest of your work before we head into Saturday's game?
Stampede.com on the 24/7 Sports Network.
Awesome. Well, thanks a bunch for jumping on, Adam, and thanks a bunch for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a rating and review on the podcast platform of your choice. If you're watching on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment, continue to grow this thing. It's been great to watch it grow over the course of another football season. For Adam, I'm Michael Swain. Thanks as always for listening to the Fog.net podcast. We'll talk to you all Sunday after what should be another exciting Kansas football game.